Hello, Player One. Welcome to the Gaming History Club. My name is Gabby.
Hello, and I'm JP. When video game developers push their games to be more and more realistic, the smallest of real life phenomenons need to be taken into account. One of the most challenging to incorporate are reflections. Let's step through the looking glass that perhaps most players don't really think about, but massively impacts the immersion in video games and how it evolved with the times.
So, what do we even mean with reflections? In games, we usually see a lot of reflective surfaces, like mirrors, which are quite clear it's one to one reflections, or, well, at least it should be.
There should be.
They should be, yes. But there are many surfaces with their own intricacies. For example, water. Water is one of those painful, difficult things to give physics to in general, but just talking about reflections themselves, in real life, water bends light, and especially in water movement, the reflections can be complex. Another examples are windows, streets after rainfall, tiny objects like water bottles, anything shiny really in video games, which can be all sort of things, from the extra clean, super white, shiny buildings in Mirror's Age to the car hoods, car bodies in GTA or Cyberpunk, all of those cool, shiny stuff, right?
Mm.
The point is, reflections come in many shapes, sizes, and colors. They can be polished, metallic, blurry, glossy, wet, and they all need to be programmed in and adapted to the services within the game. It can be quite a task.
Yeah.
But game developers are smart. The problem hasn't been inventing programming techniques to display reflections. The real problem here is implementing a solution that isn't too resource heavy on the console or computer, so you player ones can play it smoothly, basically. Especially when those reflections also need to account for uneven surfaces, like ripples in water and different lighting conditions, it can get out of hand pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's like making a simulation just for light.
Yeah.
Never mind a video game, let's just make light simulator. Reflections are a complicated set of mechanics for a computer to handle. Given that AAA video games are often made to look as good as currently possible and as realistic as possible with high quality, high resolution textures, animations, this is a bit of a generalization, but mirroring techniques, especially those that provide a high quality reflection image, work by recreating the game world it's reflecting within the reflection itself. This causes the computer or console, in essence, to have double the workload. So, if we think about game graphics and how fast they improve, simply putting reflections in the game can make it twice as difficult for the game to run. But as we mentioned, this is a broad generalization and only really intended to explain in real simple terms why reflections can actually be so difficult to put in games. If you're going to take anything away from this episode, Player One, let it be this. Reflections are really, really taxing for your computer or console to handle. And quite often games avoid them completely. If you stylize the water in your game to always be moving, with crashing waves, hey, you'll never expect to see a reflection through the crashing waves. If in the wasteland of Fallout all the mirrors just so happen to be smashed and broken, well, you wouldn't expect to see a reflection in those either. And once you're aware of this, you'll notice this a lot more when you play games. Reflections have been used as a way to flex the proverbial muscle of video games too, however, and we will talk about some outstanding examples too.
So there are different types and techniques that developers use to create reflections in video games. The first one that we want to talk about is called twin rooms. So twin rooms, this is the classic ingenious way of mirroring. When the player looks into a mirror, he's looking into an actual duplicate of the room. Only the room being looked into is mirror reversed. The mirror is just an invisible wall into a copy of the room that you're standing in, with an additional front facing player character being mirrored as well. The most popular but not the first game that used this technique is probably Super Mario 64. Inside the castle, one of the rooms has a large mirror covering the entire wall. Little did we know as kids that we're actually looking at a duplicate of the room and Mario himself.
Yeah, it's crazy. And literally, the other Mario inside the mirror is an actual character that's also being controlled by yourself. It's just mirror reversed. So
Yeah.
it's an actual character moving around.
So it's not like a real
No, no,
reflections.
no.
Yeah.
There's no reflection at all. It's literally the same thing happening twice, mirror reversed. Very, very genius, actually.
Yeah, and that's exactly why that you mentioned before how taxing it can be. It's practically double.
Yes,
Hmm.
exactly.
Another one is Duke Nukem 3D from 1996, also used this technique to great success. Probably players were walking into the room, shooting their reflection on first sight, before realizing on closer inspection that they're actually just looking into a faraway mirror. So, yeah, no use. That's not your enemy, that's just yourself.
You've been pranked.
Yeah, exactly. This method is practically not used much anymore. It was a popular method with older games dating back to before the 21st century, when the rooms of games were less complicated and had a lot less going on than games nowadays. In the case for Mario, for example, it really was just a room and a character to duplicate. Nowadays, rooms can be incredibly big, filled with many small movable objects, characters, and effects, so that can be a lot more difficult to create with twin rooms. Another type that we want to talk about is planar reflections. So, this is a similar approach and concept to twin rooms, but a little less blunt and more intricate than the twin rooms. The way planar reflection works is by adding an additional render. So, rendering is the process of creating the images you see on screen. Essentially, an additional virtual camera is placed inside the in game mirror, which turns on if the player can see and look into the mirror from his angle. The shortcomings to this technique are similar to that of twin rooms, though. Planar reflections work best for simple and plain rooms with few details. Nothing too complicated with too many details, or it will start to get glitchy.
Another technique, which is somewhat old but still very much used to this day and is also quite efficient at it in the right context, are cube maps. Cube mapping is a type of reflection mapping whereby a texture, which is the reflected image, is added directly into an object in the game. Essentially, the object contains a specific picture resembling the game world. But it's a trick. There's no real time reflecting being done. So you could imagine this as a spoon, which has a texture, and that texture is a reflection, but it's not real time, so it's just a hard coded picture of a reflection
Yeah.
inside that spoon. Cube mapping in particular works by using 6 flat images, each representing a view from a specific direction: front, back, up, down, left, and right. These are placed on the edges of a cube and blurred just enough as to make the actual cube itself invisible. The end product, due to the blurring that's required, is not of a high quality, so the reflections look inaccurate and aren't suitable for mirrors or objects that move. Because, again, the 6 images are flat, non moving images. They're not real reflections, it's just pictures.
Yep.
However, they work well for simulating reflective surfaces like water, glass, or metallic objects. Cube mapping as a concept actually goes as far back as 1986 in Ned Green's paper, Environment Mapping and Other Applications of World Projections. But the computational hardware just wasn't capable yet of accessing 6 texture images at the same time and implementing it into a cube. But this changed with the release of NVIDIA's GeForce 256 GPU released in 1999. NVIDIA introduced cube maps to the gaming world, and the PlayStation 1 would make significant use of cube maps in its driving games. Cube maps are very efficient due to their simplicity, and wow, have we come a long way from it's not being able to be done at all with the hardware at the time to it now just being the most efficient and simplest way we have of making reflections. However, they need to be used very smartly too. If the player character has a reflective sword, for example, that uses cube maps, and it's got a cube map of images of an outside environment, but the player is actually standing inside of a room, like a dark room, and the sword is reflecting, the outside sky with water and trees or what have you, it would probably break the immersion somewhat,
I know,
right?
that doesn't check out, does it?
No.
It's quite funny that you mentioned it was used for driving games, which actually involves a lot of movement.
Yeah, that's true, I guess, yeah. Yeah. A good example of cube maps are in some of the Spider-Man games, when the player crawls up some of the reflective glass on skyscrapers. But they're very common in many, many different games of all ages and types, and they're still very much used today too, when the likelihood of something happening in the background isn't super high. So it's always quite true to what is probably being reflected, even though it's not real time. Like that's probably what behind you looks like anyway. The most advanced type of cube maps are actually the skyboxes, where the game world sits inside of a very big cube, with the inside of the cube showing images and animations of the sky, the stars, the background vistas. Though this isn't exactly relating to reflections anymore, one cannot mention cube maps without skyboxes, which is the most fanciful way of using a cube map, actually, right?
Yeah, I think we did talk about skyboxes when we talk about realistic cities on our chit chat back
Yes,
then.
and how good they were in Red Dead Redemption 2, right?
Yes, and actually, I think Assassin's Creed as well having like quite good skyboxes were reflective to real world skies and star constellations and stuffs like that. So yeah, good skyboxes can definitely make a big difference to how a game looks. So the next type we have SSR, which stands for Screen Space Reflections. SSR is a technique that traces reflection rays in screen space, but this isn't ray tracing because ray tracing is a newer, more advanced technique which traces reflection rays in the world space from the light source itself. So, SSR can simulate the reflection of objects in mirrors, water, or other reflective surfaces by analyzing the screen's content and calculating reflections based on what the camera currently sees. So, yeah, SSR is only visible to objects on the screen. Only objects visible to the players are subject to reflection itself. A mirror using SSR cannot reflect what it doesn't see or what is currently off screen in the frame of the game camera, like what's behind the back or on the side of the player. So, for example, if you play first person shooter games, it doesn't really take account into what's behind you. It's quite a resource intensive method though, but still more efficient than planar reflections that we talked about before. SSR was introduced by the German game developer Crytek, the developers behind the Far Cry and the Crysis games. It was introduced in their game engine CryEngine 3 that was released in 2009, and the first game to use SSR was Crysis 2 that was released in 2011.
So, player one, you probably guessed what our last type of reflection production method is. And if you haven't by now, it is by far the most common, widely used, and newest kid on the block. Of course, we're talking about ray tracing here. So, as Gabi mentioned with SSR, ray tracing does not only recreate the light effect, but also the light source itself, providing as close to a realistic reflection effect as currently possible. Ray tracing simulates how light behaves when it encounters reflective and refractive surfaces. So, when a ray hits a reflective surface, it produces a reflection ray, continuing the simulation of light bouncing off the surface. Similarly, when a ray strikes a refractive surface, it generates a refraction ray to simulate the change in the ray's direction as it passes through the surface. The rays are usually cast from the camera, the player's perspective, into the game world, and then traced as they interact and intersect with objects in the game environment.
So basically, it involves a lot of physics as well.
Yes, they're actually trying to mimic how light works in real life inside of the video game. And by recreating the interaction of light with objects, it is very, very resource intensive though, which is a common theme in this episode by now.
Yes.
But ray tracing is very accurate, especially reflecting moving objects. This isn't limited to reflecting the main character on a surface either, though. All types of projectiles, splashes, chips, sparks can be accurately, and some might even say hyper realistically, reflected.
Yeah, and in terms of prowess, it is the best way to create game mirrors. Ray tracing has a long history. Somehow, it even goes back as far as the 16th century, as a matter of fact, with German Albrecht Dürer, a painter, printmaker, and theorist, being credited for its invention when he described ways to project 3D scenes onto an image plane. Did I say that correctly, by the way, the name?
Albrecht Dürer.
Yeah, that is the correct way to say it.
By the way, he lived at the same time as Leonardo da Vinci. Just so you put that into context, how old that is, like the 16th century. You know what I
That's
mean?
crazy. I wonder if they know each other.
There's a rumor that they did, but upon further research, it turns out well, there's no proof that they
Oh,
ever
okay.
met. So, but yeah, I was interested to find out. So on Wikipedia it says that like they have had contact, but when you research more into it, then you realize, oh, turns out Wikipedia can't be trusted with this very important nugget of a fact. So
So we don't know,
we have no
basically.
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I think this is a little bit much for today's episode. I think the 16th century, that's going back a little bit too far. I think.
I think so too. Well, video games history doesn't really go back to 16th century, but
No.
apparently this particular technology is. So the cool thing about ray tracing too is that it can be used for more than reflections. The technology lends itself well to producing shadows and global illumination, which is the general behavior of light within the game. To wrap up, we will highlight the fact, though, that all the techniques we spoke about have their use, and a combination of all of them are used for different parts of the game to make them as efficient as possible. Which is, you know what? It's a very important point of this episode because reflections are, again, really, really, really taxing on your poor console or computer.
So, how necessary is it really to provide good reflections in video games? Is it a big deal? Does it really contribute that much to the immersion of a game? Because if we think about GTA 6 coming out next year, well, hopefully, fingers crossed, coming out next year.
Yes.
Imagine if that gets released without any reflections, there's no mirrors. You would probably think, what did they spend their billions of dollars on if they can't even give us some nice mirrors?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it seems to be that ray tracing itself is becoming such a big deal when you're making a decision. Which game do you want to buy? Does it actually have the immersion with the ray tracing or even the hardware that you're buying, right? You're building a new PC. Which graphics card do you actually want to buy? Is Nvidia? Is AMD? Because, the difference in the ray tracing capabilities.
Yeah, that's true. Player one, you may have noticed if you ever look up the differences between an NVIDIA and an AMD GPU, most people will boil it down to a single question. Would you rather have really good ray tracing, or would you rather save a little bit of money, but then the ray tracing won't be quite as good? So NVIDIA is quite clearly the better one that can do ray tracing. And it makes
Yes.
sense because when we look back at 99, they're also the first ones to incorporate cube maps. So obviously, NVIDIA thinks of reflections as like one of the core things to provide graphics capabilities in, right? Even the current generation of home consoles, apart from Nintendo, of course, which is always the special kid in the room,
Yes.
they make a massive deal and advertise it like right at the forefront, like we can do ray tracing. But is it really that important? Nah, I don't know.
I mean, I guess it is important in some sense to give that extra oomph when you play games. It's just really impressive when you play games like Cyberpunk. I don't know why I'm mentioning Cyberpunk again, but it's the obvious thing when you play Cyberpunk and you can see on those shiny cars all of the reflection of Night City. It's just beautiful.
The interesting thing too is if we compare with movies, for example. So Toy Story 4, I mean, there's a lot more than just reflections going on when you make an animated 3D movie, right? But Toy Story 4, for example, right? It would take one CPU 1,200 hours just to create one frame of the movie, right? But now let's compare that to video games. Video games need to do it instantly. As a matter of fact, if you're running it at 60 FPS or even just 30 FPS, it has to do that 30 times per second instantly, right? So that's just to give player one an idea just how difficult it is to make reflections, which in the grand scheme of things, like how much does it change really? Perhaps not much, but as soon as you want to make a quite realistic looking game, it's a massive deal and it's very taxing on your hardware.
Yeah, well, for me, actually, I would rather have just a very smoothly running game.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Massively important, yeah. Yeah. You do want it smooth, you do want the high frame rate. Much more important than how pretty it looks. It needs to be smooth
Playable.
experience as well. But
Yes.
I guess this is why they also incorporate all types of different reflection techniques where if not much is happening, you can get a cube map to go by. But if you are speeding through Night City in Cyberpunk 2077, then it needs to be a little bit more in real time so that when you do cruise past a specific looking building, that exact building in real time is reflected on your golden car.
Yes.
So, thank you for joining us, Player One. We hope you enjoyed hearing all about the evolution of reflections in video games.
Yeah, and what about you, player one? How important are reflections for you in video games? Is it vital for your immersion, or is it just a visual candy? Well, let us know by dropping us a message on our website, gaminghistory.club. New episodes of Gaming History Club are released every other Wednesday, so make sure you subscribe and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Gaming History Club.
Come back in a couple weeks, Player One, when we celebrate Gaming History Club's 1 year anniversary. Can you believe it's been a year already, Gabby?
I cannot actually.
Yeah,
That felt really quick.
I know. Come join us, Player One, and we will discuss all the great benefits that we get and have gotten from playing the ultimate art form in the solar system, video games. See ya.